There comes a moment when the ground beneath your feet simply vanishes, and you realize you are not falling, you are being called. The dark night of the soul is not a punishment or a failure. It is an invitation from your deepest self to finally come home. But what emerges from this sacred darkness will transform everything you thought you knew about who you are. In the depths of your most profound collapse, something extraordinary is taking shape. This is not destruction, though it feels like everything is ending. This is not abandonment, though you feel utterly alone. This is the soul's most mysterious and essential work, and what comes after this passage will redefine the very foundation of your existence. Jung understood that these moments of complete dissolution are not random tragedies. They are the psyche's most sophisticated tool for rebirth. We will explore together how the collapse you fear is actually the opening your soul has been waiting for. We will understand why the ground must disappear before you can learn to truly walk. And we will discover that what feels like the end of everything is often the beginning of who you were always meant to become. The process is ancient, the wisdom is deep, and the transformation that awaits you is more profound than anything you have yet imagined. When everything you have built your identity upon begins to crumble, there is a terror that goes beyond ordinary fear. It is the terror of complete unknowing, of standing in a space where all your familiar landmarks have dissolved. You reach for the walls that once supported you, but they are no longer there. You call out to the roles that once defined you, but they no longer answer. This is not merely an emotional crisis, it is what Jung recognized as the necessary dissolution of an outgrown self. The ego, that constructed sense of who we think we are, builds itself from external validations, familiar patterns, and stories we tell ourselves about our place in the world. But there comes a time when these structures, no matter how carefully constructed, can no longer contain the fullness of who you are becoming. The collapse is not a sign that you have failed, it is a sign that you have outgrown the container. Think of a seed that has been planted in soil. For a time, the hard shell of the seed provides protection and structure. But when the life force within begins to expand, that same protective shell becomes a prison. The shell must crack open, must dissolve completely, for the new life to emerge. The seed does not choose this dissolution. It is compelled by the force of its own becoming. Your identity crisis, your dark night, your moment of complete unraveling is this same sacred cracking open. The person you were is not dying because something is wrong with you. The person you were is dying because something is so profoundly right with you that it can no longer be contained within the old boundaries. Jung wrote about the individuation process, the psychological journey toward wholeness that requires us to move beyond the limited self we have constructed. This process cannot happen gradually or gently when we have become too attached to our familiar forms. Sometimes the psyche must create a crisis so complete that we have no choice but to surrender to a deeper truth about ourselves. Can you sense that beneath the terror of not knowing who you are, there is also a strange relief? A part of you that is tired of maintaining the performance, tired of fitting into shapes that were always too small for your soul? The dark night strips away everything that was never truly you, leaving only what is essential and real. When Jung spoke about the shadow, he was referring to all the parts of ourselves we have rejected or denied in order to maintain our conscious identity. During times of profound crisis, these shadow elements can no longer be kept in the basement of our awareness. They surface with an urgency that feels overwhelming, demanding to be seen and integrated. This is not the comfortable shadow work of journaling or therapy sessions. This is the raw, unfiltered encounter with aspects of yourself that your conscious mind has spent years trying to avoid. Old angers surface. Forgotten griefs demand attention. Parts of your personality that you learned to hide or suppress suddenly take center stage in your inner drama. The purification that happens during the dark night is not a gentle cleansing ritual. It is more like a wildfire that burns away everything that is not essential, leaving only what is truly alive within you. You discover parts of yourself that you have been afraid to acknowledge. You meet the aspects of your personality that you learned to hide in order to be acceptable to others. But here is what Jung understood about this encounter with our disowned selves. It is not meant to destroy us. It is meant to make us whole. The parts of yourself that you have been most afraid of often contain the very qualities that are essential for your authentic expression. The anger you have suppressed may contain your righteous power. The sadness you have avoided may hold your deepest capacity for love. During the dark night, there is nowhere to hide from these shadow aspects. They present themselves with such intensity that you have no choice but to look directly at what you have spent so much energy avoiding. And in this forced encounter, something remarkable begins to happen. The qualities you thought would destroy you if acknowledged begin to reveal their essential wisdom. What if the parts of yourself you have been most ashamed of are actually the keys to your liberation? What if the emotions you have worked so hard to control contain the very life force that has been missing from your carefully constructed existence? The psychological structures we build to navigate the world are necessary for a time, but they are not meant to be permanent. They are like scaffolding that supports a building under construction. But when the building is complete, the scaffolding must be removed, or it becomes an obstruction to the structure it once supported. Your old ways of understanding yourself, your familiar coping mechanisms, your habitual responses to life's challenges were all part of the scaffolding that helped you survive and develop. But there comes a time when these same structures that once protected you begin to limit your growth. The dark night is the soul's way of dismantling the scaffolding that is no longer serving your expansion. Jung spoke of the old king that must die for the new king to be born. This is not merely poetic language. It is a description of a real psychological process. The version of yourself that has guided you through one phase of life must step aside to make room for the version of yourself that is needed for the next phase. This transition is rarely smooth or comfortable. The old self does not want to relinquish control. It has worked hard to establish its position, its identity, its sense of importance. But the new self cannot emerge while the old self maintains its grip on the steering wheel of your consciousness. The collapse you are experiencing is this necessary changing of the guard within your psyche. It feels chaotic and frightening because you are caught between two versions of yourself. The old you is dissolving, but the new you has not yet fully emerged. You are in the liminal space between identities, and this space can feel like a kind of psychological death. But what appears to be an ending is actually the most profound form of beginning. What feels like death is actually the labor pains of your own rebirth. The house of your old self must be demolished before the house of your new self can be built on the same ground. In mystical traditions across cultures, this experience of dissolution and rebirth has been recognized as one of the most sacred passages available to human consciousness. St. John of the Cross called it the dark night of the soul. The alchemists called it the nigredo, the blackening that precedes transformation. Jung called it the necessary death that precedes psychological resurrection. What these traditions understood is that consciousness cannot evolve gradually when it has become crystallized in limiting patterns. Sometimes evolution requires a complete breakdown of the old system before a new system can emerge. The caterpillar does not slowly grow wings. It must dissolve completely in the cocoon before it can become a butterfly. Your dark night is your cocoon. The dissolution you are experiencing is not random destruction. It is intelligent transformation. Your psyche is not breaking down. It is breaking through to a new level of organization, a new way of being that is more aligned with your essential nature. Can you feel, even in the midst of your disorientation, that something is being born? Can you sense that this ending is also a beginning? This death is also a birth. This darkness is also the womb from which your new life will emerge. The soul operates according to different principles than the mind. While the mind seeks control, predictability, and familiar patterns, the soul seeks truth, depth, and authentic expression. When these two aspects of our being fall out of alignment, tension begins to build within the psyche. For many people, this tension remains unconscious for years or even decades. We adapt to the disconnect between what our mind thinks we should want and what our soul actually needs. We learn to function with this internal split, managing the symptoms of our misalignment without addressing its root cause. But the soul has its own intelligence and its own timing. Jung understood that the psyche has a self-regulating function, a natural tendency toward balance and wholeness. When the split between our conscious identity and our deeper nature becomes too pronounced, the psyche will create circumstances that force a reckoning. The dark night is often this forced reckoning. It is the soul's way of saying that the compromise you have been living is no longer sustainable. The accommodations you have made to fit into a life that is not truly yours have reached their limit. The soul will no longer consent to being ignored or overruled. This is why the dark night often feels like a rebellion from within. It is not that something external is attacking you. It is that something internal is refusing to cooperate with the status quo any longer. The soul is staging a revolution against the tyranny of a life that does not honor its essential nature. What you thought was your breakdown is actually your soul's breakthrough. What you experienced as collapse was actually your inner wisdom refusing to support structures that were no longer serving your highest good. The ground did not disappear randomly. It was withdrawn deliberately by the part of you that knew it was time for a different foundation. During the dark night, you discover that you cannot think your way out of this experience. The rational mind, which has been your primary tool for navigating challenges, suddenly seems inadequate for the depth of transformation that is required. This is deeply unsettling for most people, because we have been taught to believe that every problem has a solution that can be reached through analysis and action. But the dark night is not a problem to be solved. It is a process to be surrendered to. It is not a puzzle to be figured out. It is a mystery to be lived through. The very attempt to control or manage this experience often prolongs the difficulty, because control and management are functions of the old self that is trying to maintain its dominance. The soul speaks a different language than the mind. Where the mind uses logic and analysis, the soul uses symbol and intuition. Where the mind seeks immediate answers, the soul reveals its wisdom gradually through lived experience. The dark night is the soul's classroom, and its teaching methods are unlike anything you learned in conventional education. You may find yourself drawn to solitude in ways that surprise you. Activities that once brought pleasure may feel empty or meaningless. People who were once important to you may suddenly feel distant or irrelevant. This is not depression, though it may be mistaken for it. This is the soul's way of creating the space and silence necessary for its deeper work. In this space of withdrawal from external stimulation, you begin to hear voices within yourself that were previously drowned out by the noise of ordinary living. You discover desires that were buried under layers of obligation and expectation. You encounter aspects of your personality that were suppressed in favor of more socially acceptable qualities. The dark night creates a temporary sanctuary where your authentic self can finally speak without interference from the voices of others, the demands of your roles, or the pressure of social expectations. In this sanctuary, you begin to remember who you were before you learned to be who others needed you to be. Jung identified what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create something new from the tension between opposing forces. During the dark night, you are caught between the person you have been and the person you are becoming. This tension is uncomfortable, but it is also creative. It is in this space between identities that your new self begins to emerge. The transcendent function does not resolve the tension by choosing one side over the other. Instead, it creates a third option, a new way of being that incorporates elements from both sides while transcending the limitations of each. This is not compromise, which weakens both sides, but synthesis, which creates something stronger than either original position. Your old self contained valuable qualities that should not be discarded entirely. Your emerging self brings new capacities that were not available before. The work of the dark night is to discover how these seemingly contradictory aspects of your being can be woven together into a more complete and authentic whole. This process cannot be rushed or forced. It unfolds according to its own organic timing, like the gestation of new life. You cannot will yourself through this transformation any more than you can will a pregnancy to complete itself faster than the natural 9 months required. What you can do is learn to cooperate with the process rather than resist it. You can learn to trust the intelligence that is orchestrating this metamorphosis, even when you cannot understand its methods. You can learn to find stability in the midst of change by anchoring yourself in the deeper currents of your being, rather than the surface waves of circumstance. The integration that happens during and after the dark night creates what Jung called the individuated self. This is not the ego self that was constructed from external expectations and social roles. This is a more authentic self that emerges from the marriage of conscious and unconscious, mind and soul, personal will, and transpersonal wisdom. The individuated self does not reject the world or retreat into spiritual bypassing. Instead, it engages with life from a place of greater depth and authenticity. It no longer needs to choose between being true to itself and being connected to others, because it has discovered how to maintain its essential nature while still participating fully in relationships and responsibilities. This integrated self brings a quality of presence that was not available before the dark night. There is a groundedness that comes from having been completely ungrounded and learning to find stability from within. There is a peace that comes from having wrestled with your demons and discovered they were actually angels in disguise. People around you may notice that something has shifted in your energy, though they may not be able to name what it is. There is often a quality of authenticity and depth that emerges after the dark night that draws others to you in a different way. You become a refuge for others who are going through their own processes of dissolution and rebirth. But this transformation is not primarily for others. It is for you. It is the soul's gift to itself, the psyche's way of creating the conditions for a more fulfilling and meaningful existence. What emerges from the dark night is not a perfect life, but a more authentic one. Not a life without challenges, but a life with the inner resources to meet those challenges from a place of depth rather than surface reactivity. The wisdom that comes through the dark night cannot be taught in books or workshops. It can only be earned through the direct experience of dissolution and regeneration. It is a wisdom that lives in your bones, in your cellular memory, in the very fabric of who you have become. This wisdom changes how you relate to future difficulties. You no longer panic when life becomes uncertain, because you have learned that uncertainty can be a doorway to new possibilities. You no longer despair when old structures fall away, because you have discovered that destruction can be the prelude to creation. You carry within yourself now the knowledge that you can survive the complete dissolution of everything you thought you were and emerge more whole than before. This is not theoretical knowledge, it is lived understanding. It becomes a source of unshakable confidence that no external circumstance can take away from you. The dark night teaches you that you are both more fragile and more resilient than you ever imagined. More fragile because all the structures you built for protection can be swept away in an instant. More resilient because the core of who you are can survive even the complete collapse of everything you thought was necessary for your existence. When you meet others who are in the midst of their own dark nights, you recognize the signs immediately. You see through their fear and confusion to the transformation that is trying to emerge. You become a witness to their process, offering presence rather than advice, understanding rather than solutions. Your own experience becomes a bridge that others can cross when they are ready to trust the process they are going through. You do not try to rescue them from their dark night, because you understand that the journey through the darkness is precisely what they need to discover their own inner light. This is how healing spreads through the world, not through advice or techniques, but through the presence of those who have walked through their own fires and emerged transformed. Your dark night was not just for you, it was preparation for the work you are meant to do in the world. The soul takes control not through force or manipulation, but through an irresistible invitation to authenticity. Once you have tasted the freedom of being truly yourself, you cannot go back to the prison of being who others expect you to be. Once you have experienced the peace of accepting all aspects of yourself, you cannot return to the exhaustion of maintaining a false image. The dark night initiates you into a different way of living, one that is guided by inner wisdom rather than external pressure. This does not mean you become selfish or disconnected from others. Instead, you become more genuinely available to others because you are no longer depleted by the effort of pretending to be someone you are not. Your relationships begin to shift as you stop performing and start being present. Some relationships may not survive this shift because they were based on false connections or mutual unconsciousness. But the relationships that do survive become deeper and more meaningful than anything you experienced before. You discover that true intimacy is only possible when you are willing to be seen as you actually are, not as you think you should be. The masks and defenses that once seemed necessary for connection actually prevented the very connection you were seeking. As you continue to live from this more authentic place, you realize that the dark night was not a detour from your life path. It was the path itself. It was the way your soul chose to guide you back to yourself. It was the route that led you home to who you were always meant to be. The changes that emerge from this process are not temporary adjustments. They are fundamental shifts in the architecture of your being. You have been rebuilt from the ground up, not by external forces, but by the deepest wisdom within yourself. What comes after the dark night is not a return to who you were before, because that person no longer exists. What comes after is the emergence of who you were always meant to become, the self that was waiting beneath all the layers of conditioning and compromise. This is the soul taking control, not as a violent overthrow of your conscious will, but as a gentle but irresistible invitation to live from your deepest truth. The dark night was the labor. What comes after is the birth of your most authentic self. If this exploration of the dark night of the soul has resonated with something deep within you, I invite you to share your own experience in the comments below. Have you walked through your own dark night? What emerged for you on the other side? Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear as they navigate their own journey through the darkness toward the light of their authentic self. Subscribe to continue this journey of discovery together as we explore the profound wisdom that Jung offers for understanding the soul's mysterious ways of guiding us home to ourselves.